just saw your nuclear thing
Oh yeah.
whenever it came out, like a few days back. It was just as I was finishing my nuclear thing for current affairs, which obviously won't come out for a little bit. Interesting crossover. Like you were talking more about so my bit was, are you familiar with like the sort of the problem of the nuclear waste depository messages, like the warning signs
No.
that they put? Oh, well then you get to find
Oh yes,
out.
yes, yes. Oh, because they just the idea of having an image that people are going to understand in
Yeah,
twenty
exactly.
thousand years or whatever. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
fucking mind-boggling. The fact that
Yeah, and it's insane because I went and read like all the reports the research reports they publish where they try and figure out how to do that, and it's almost like reading like a science fiction novel because they
yeah,
use like, so they have concepts like they use hostile architecture and stuff, and you go through all the chapter headings and stuff, and they're all called like menacing earthworks and like universal signs of pain and horror and stuff like that. It's all like insane stuff.
so I guess I'll like officially start. I'll keep some of that in, but so today I'm talking with Aisling McCrea. Got that all right?
Hello.
First and
Yes, you
last name?
did.
Okay, good. Aisling is a contributing editor at Current Affairs, and her work has also appeared in The Outline. And you are working on a graduate degree right now?
Yeah, I'm just in the final stages, which is horrifying, and I hate it.
Gee, I never hear that from anyone in academia.
Yeah, it's great. Like, if you talk to just literally anyone who's doing a PhD, it's like they've just come back from war. Like, no one seems to enjoy themselves in any way.
Yeah,
It's good.
yeah, great sleep schedules and all, lots of fun. Okay, cool. And so Aisling has written a lot of great pieces for Current Affairs in The Outline. She's written about the IDW, but I guess you know what? We'll start off talking about your most recent piece in the print edition, because I think that's fun and it's really different. I was only like mildly aware of ASMR from maybe like some people referencing it in their videos, and so I didn't know that much about it. I just thought it was some people whispering into a microphone and making nice like quiet sounds, and that it is that. But if you could like just kind of give like a brief like synopsis or like kind of like what you were trying to say with the piece.
Yeah, so if people aren't familiar with ASMR, and part of the piece is kind of about, it's a little bit difficult to explain without sounding incredibly weird.
Yeah.
But it stands for Autonomous Meridian Sensory Response, and basically it's the effect of when you hear certain sounds or experience certain stimuli, particularly sound, but it can be things like movement as well. You get a sort of tingling sensation in your head. So it's like if someone's like whispering in your ear. People experience it a lot if they go, for example, to their hairdressers and they're having like their hair touched a lot, or like experiencing like kind of movement or sound around their ears, or sounds like rustling of newspapers, various sounds. A lot of people kind of experience an enjoyable kind of tingling sensation in their head, or they kind of sends shivers down their spine. It started becoming kind of a thing that people were talking about on the internet maybe about 10 years ago. And now on YouTube, there's a big scene of, they call themselves ASM artists. So people who essentially make sound collages, or they like whisper that, like people will do very elaborate things. Like they'll do, so the more traditional things are role plays involving people talking to the camera and making sounds that people enjoy. So they might pretend to be your hairdresser, and they'll get like a kind of wig and put it like near the camera, and they'll be like cutting it, so you can sort of close your eyes and pretend to be a hairdresser, pretend to be having a haircut. Sometimes people will do very weird things, like they'll pretend they're like a travel agent in space, and they'll like talk you through, they'll pretend they're showing you like different magazines that's like, oh, this is our tour of Saturn, and this is a and my point in the piece was that it's something that people are starting to talk a bit more about. People are starting to kind of know what it is a little bit more in the mainstream. There's still a lot of resistance. Like a lot of people think it's kind of weird. There's a lot of people who think they assume it's like a sexual thing or like a fetish thing. Point in the piece was I called it, I can't remember the exact title, but it's like a mildly tongue-in-cheek defense of
Yeah.
ASMR as an expression of radical humanity, something like that. And it's like, well, it's kind of nice that people are able to talk about having this like weird sensation and being able to share it and see that other people also experience it and that it's not weird, and that we can kind of enjoy sort of having these ridiculous things where we sort of play and experiment and admit that we enjoy things that adults aren't supposed to enjoy.
Yeah.
And one of my main points was that it kind of brings back an element of play into adult life, because adults are not supposed to play. Like, you can enjoy art and culture. Obviously, there are elements of play to like the sexual side of things, but you're not supposed to like enjoy doing role plays in a non-sexual scenario. That's considered like a weird thing.
Yeah.
Or to like squish about, a lot of people, they'll play with things like slime or like kids' toys. That's considered kind of like a weird or shameful thing to enjoy play. And I think my point was that you can kind of find an interesting expression of like what humans actually like to do and what it means to enjoy life. And ASMR is something that's sort of bringing out this interesting side that you don't usually see, and admit that adults do like to like be silly and enjoy playing with stuff. I don't know, like if you have kids, or if you play with kids, like your friends' kids, or you work with kids, sometimes you really get to enjoy, like if you just sitting at the little table and your kid is like making like a macaroni thing, and you do it with them and you're sort of enjoying it more than you think you should, or you're like playing, they're playing with toys and imagining, oh, this is happening and that's happening, and you take part, and it's like, it's fun, and it's something that we sort of leave behind in childhood. And I just wanted to sort of jokingly but also not jokingly say, hey, it's interesting that like we sort of leave those things behind, and it's nice that we can rediscover it in some form or another.
Yeah, that was great. I mean, and what was interesting, I was thinking about this the other day because I had my daughter on my lap and she's got like bangs that were in her face, and I just get a just kind of like gently blew the hair out of her face, and she loved it. It was so great. And like you like, yeah, like to some extent, like, and what I found is interesting in your piece is that the taking like physical pleasure in things that's not like sexual is kind of almost more taboo than like whatever like weird sexual fetish you might have. It's like, well, okay, yeah, fine, you're into that like long list of like things that internet porn have like seeped into your brain, but it's very strange that you like the crinkling of paper, or the way the coffee sounds when you pour the beans into the grinder or whatever. And like a lot of that, it made me think of have you ever read the short story The Machine Stops?
No, I haven't.
It's great. I highly recommend it. It's a rather old sci-fi story. It's E.M. Forrester, actually. And it's, people live in, I'll have to do a video or write about it at some point, but every individual is in like a room where they're in a comfy chair and they have a screen in front of them, and it's like they have YouTube in front of them, and they can watch a lecture or give a lecture. They press a button, they get music, they get food, all these things. And they have all these, they get flooded with all these ideas, because I like ideas. But they don't get that like tactile thing, they don't get that human touch, that like direct experience. And it seems like, we have all this stuff, all these toys we can buy, all these, experiences we can buy, but like so much of like just like the little tactile things that some of what make us the most human, like, are very much just just not present. It's interesting. And it's one of those things like we worried that's where we're going.
Yeah, I agree. And it's like we almost can't conceive of it we can't conceive of that sort of tactility outside of the bounds that the boxes we usually put it in. So like people almost like they feel compelled to make jokes. Like if you say like, oh, I really like, if you watch Nigella Lawson, like she's like a British TV chef.
Okay.
But she's had I think she's been on like US TV and stuff as well. She's this very attractive woman, and when she talks about the thing everyone knows her for is that it's very sensual. So she'll be like, oh, I love to like knead the bread, and I love to just like push my fingers into the thing. And people always make these jokes that it's like they make sexual jokes about it. You are allowed to like enjoy physical things.
That's why it's called. That's why it's called kneading the dough. You knead the dough.
Yeah.
I think Bob Ross might have been one of the first ASM artists.
Yeah, well, this is the thing is I think he was one of the people that people would talk about. They would say like, "Oh yeah, I like to watch it." And a lot of people, because it's not new to like find sound relaxing, like because people, in the like 90s, 2000s, you always used to get those like whale music or like the
Yeah,
ocean music CDs, and people get those some people get those sound machines, like the
yeah.
ambient noise machines that make like rain sounds or water sounds to help you go to sleep. That's not a new thing, but it was something about the fact that like ASMR is specifically like a tingling sensation that seems to make people very uncomfortable. But like people like sounds and they like to touch things and poke at things, and that's something that you really like. I completely agree. Like as we get more into a situation where we're doing everything through screens and you have all this like different forms of entertainment and spend a lot more time on the internet than you used to, and obviously there's some really great things that can come out of that, but also I worry that you're kind of losing something if you're not taking time. I actually I'm not very good at keeping up with it, but I started trying to like every day it sounds so pretentious, every day have some sort of moment with nature,
Uh-huh.
um even if
No, it
it's
doesn't
just
sound
like,
pretentious at all. It's good.
yeah, even if it's literally just like I've had to work at home all day and I just open the window, breathe in the air, and take a moment to like notice. Because I used to try and meditate, but I'm really terrible at it, and it makes me really uncomfortable. Like I can't do it for more than like 2 minutes. It just like it's something about it just like makes me really uncomfortable in my skin. But I was like, okay, well, either go for a walk, or it could be something like really big, or go for a hike or whatever, or even just like open the window and just notice like, okay, this is what it feels like, this is what the air on my face feels like, this is what like breathing in the air feels like, this is maybe it's raining, okay, this is what it looks like when the rain patters on the window, that's what it sounds like. I try not to talk about like what humans want or need, because that's obviously like a very complicated question, and how much of what humanity is like is down to some sort of biological or evolutionary imperative, and how much of it is just like adapting to our society is obviously a massively complicated question,
But
that people get very
evolutionary
like,
psychology can answer all those questions.
yeah, science, because like men have to they have short hair because like if you're fighting another man and he can grab onto your hair, that's like that's a disadvantage in the fighting, and that's why men have short hair. There does seem to be something. It's just nice to like just touch a leaf,
Mhm.
just touch a leaf,
Well,
see how you
it's
feel.
interesting because when the weather got warm here last week, I went outside and I was I heard I could hear like all the birds and the trees rustling, and I was like, oh, this is what I've been missing. I didn't even realize I missed this until until you go back to it. But it's such an odd phenomenon, and I guess what's interesting too, and maybe we could seg into this, but like I'm in a weird age, I'm at a weird age to be on YouTube. Like I feel like a lot of, especially people making leftist content on YouTube are, like 10 years younger than me. I'm 37, and I feel like, I'm like right in between millennials and Gen Xers. And the Gen Xers are a little too cynical for me. The millennials, even though they probably should be more cynical and in some ways are, I feel like millennials have a bit more, I don't know if it's optimism or if it's like a sense of having grown up with like a certain type of media, or neoliberalism being more just embedded into everything, but they seem like less cynical, and I just can't, I can't relate to either fully. I'm just so like and so when you talk about ASMR, and not just to me, like the Gen Xer in me is like, it's not real, you should be outside really listening to things. And then the millennial in me is kind of like, well, no, that's nice, I understand you got to get it somehow. And I don't know if you had any thoughts on like kind of that divide, or
Yeah, so I guess I'm pretty classically a millennial age, and what the Gen Xers seem to have is it's that cynicism towards what they would call phoniness.
yeah,
So you
yeah,
have that like so like in the late 90s and 2000s, it used to be that if you had that sort of more left-wing cynicism, it was that you had things like, did you have that website like Sociological Images, where it
no,
was like it was like a website. It was basically like advertising is phony. That was the thesis. So it would be like, hey, look at this ad and how it's like it's trying to tell you that if you use this product, then sexy women will want to talk to you,
Yeah.
or it would be kind of
the Adbusters aesthetic.
oh yeah, adbusters, exactly. So it seems to be very much that attitude of being embedded in a consumer culture and reacting against it, but maybe not like a little bit reflexively and in its own way being a little bit reactionary, having that sort of pendulum swing where it's like, oh, I'm sick of this consumer culture. I'm making a lot of criticisms that are totally valid criticisms, but then also being like not really seeing any value in things that were valued in that time either. I think the issue before the ASMR article was I did an article about Starbucks.
Oh yes.
Which I actually think kind of relates, and it was basically about when I was growing up. I grew up in the suburbs where we didn't really have like cool stuff, and we didn't even have a Starbucks actually, but we had like a coffee chains, and that was like the cool thing to go to. And the point of the article was basically a lot of people who grow up outside of cities or outside of cool scenes do have a lot of attachment to chain things and consumer products. And you can say, okay, well, these corporations, they do a lot of negative things, they do a lot of harm, and you can say on a cultural level, oh well, maybe it's not as deep or original as such and such a thing. But people do have genuine attachments and do have genuine responses and sincere responses to things that people like to open a can of Coca-Cola with like the sort of what do you call it, the condensation kind of like a cold Coke from the fridge on a hot day, and you open it and it goes tss, and there's probably an ASMR of that actually.
Oh my goodness, there's probably 20.
Yeah. And you can say obviously there are criticisms to make of that, but the difference between Gen Xers and millennials is I think millennials have I don't know if it's a nuanced view exactly, but it's more like, yeah, we enjoy these things and the products that neoliberalism and capitalism have brought about, and we can be critical of that, but also use them and enjoy them. And it's a little bit less, it's sort of the pendulum settling in the middle, maybe. Yeah. I don't know.
Well, it was interesting. One of the things I really liked about that piece, and I think it really brought me back to being a teenager, is this, like just the idea of loitering. And in our society, every place has a specific purpose where you're supposed to go and spend money. And if you're not doing that, you're breaking the rules. And you're, so you, as a teenager, like, in order to socialize, you don't want to like hang out like just at your friends' homes, and their parents don't usually want you there half the time either. And so you're like constantly like loitering. For me, it wasn't Starbucks, but it was maybe like parking lot of a 7-Eleven, parking lot of a gas station, maybe a park for a little bit, but then it got dark, and trying to like find somewhere to buy a 40 and stuffing it in your jacket. That definitely brought me back. And it is interesting because like, yeah, you have these attachments to like cultural products that are, mass produced and maybe don't have the best ethics behind them, but they're still a lot of fun and you can enjoy them. You can't be a complete aesthetic.
Yeah, part of what I wanted to get across was that, yeah, when you're young, you're limited. You have to build your own culture and your own attachment to things, working with what you've got. So like a lot of the responses I got were from Americans, because obviously like Current Affairs is US based. So a lot of people who were responding were American. A lot of people said, yeah, their hangout was parking lots, which is not really something that we do as much in the UK, because people drive a little bit later and there's not as much the way towns are laid out. It's a bit different from the US, where
Yeah.
it's very much a driving culture, and that's like, it makes sense that like a parking lot would be like the place you go to. Here it's usually like parks and in the night, and yeah, like whatever like cafe or space you have in the day. Like sometimes it's just like you just loiter around like towns in the day. Like that was, I remember that being a very like summer holiday or like weekend thing, is like, oh, we'll just go into town. And it's like, oh, what are we gonna do? It's like, well, just go into town. That's just
Yeah.
like the thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
You don't, 'cause
Exactly.
you
Exactly.
don't have money. What are you gonna do? And especially like a little bit before, if you're like mid-teens or like early teens, mid-teens, where you can't drive.
Yeah.
It's like, what are you going to do? Like you don't really have space to do things, especially like in the UK. I think we have like, so one thing I've noticed, I have this little pet theory that 'cause in the UK we have a big binge drinking culture.
Hmm.
And if you go to, I've been to a few countries that have a lot more of a developed night culture. So if you go to places like Spain or Italy, or I went to Korea once, to Seoul, and one thing you notice is that there's lots of different things that are open late at night. So people will go shopping late at night. They
Hmm.
will like, there'll be market, like, market stalls, like food things, cafes, dance studios. Like there's all sorts of things going on at night, and people of all ages will be out. It's very like traditional. If you go to Spain, you'll go out to the sort of the town square at 10, 11 at night, and there's families out and the kids are playing, and maybe someone's got a guitar, and they're like, it sounds very stereotypical, but this really is something that happens.
Yeah. Yeah.
People are hanging out. It's very chill. And like, obviously, like drink it. People still drink or they go to clubs and whatever. In the UK, we don't really have that. Like nothing's really open past 5 that's not either like a drinking establishment or like a drunk food establishment. Those
Yeah.
two things. I think that really kind of forces you into a certain culture where that's what you do at night. And I think that's also, yeah, when you're a teenager, it's like, well, what are you going to do? Like, you
Mhm.
can't really do anything
Well,
except loiter. Other things just are not available to you.
it's interesting, and I'm curious is to hear the specifics about the culture, because when I was in London back in aught two, I like saying aught, I just do. You go to a pub from an American perspective, it's like, oh well, this is neat. Like you have like a couple generations of people sitting here drinking, and it's up like, well, wait, that's. I guess now that now the way you're saying this, I'm like, yeah, that's because there's nothing else to do.
Well, I think like there is like, I do like pub culture, and it is a little bit different than what you have like bar culture in the
Yeah.
US, because the term pub, it's literally short for public house.
Yeah.
And the idea is like, that was where you would go, not just to drink, but to just to like meet your friends, or to chat, or just whatever, have meetings, like union meetings and stuff in pubs. And there is something nice about that. If you have a nice pub, it doesn't necessarily imply like, oh, we're here to get drunk.
Hmm.
It can be like just a meeting place. So, it can be chill, and different pubs have different vibes. Um, there is also, I think, a culture of drinking as a thing in itself, the thing
Yeah.
that you go to do. And you can also talk about, I mean, we're a very repressed people. So also I think, we have, as a stereotype, that we have that because we just need to like go insane. And that's the only time that we can, that adult men can tell their friends that they love them, and like get in fights, and you tell your friend that you love them, and then also like punch them in the face 5 minutes later. So there's something to that as well, but also it's like in northern countries, because northern European countries have more of that drinking culture, because obviously like Russia as well, or Eastern
Yeah.
European countries, Baltic countries, Scandinavian countries as well. Like Scandinavian countries have like really big problems with drinking. And it's just because like, what are you gonna, you don't want to, like, you can't go outside
Yeah. Yeah.
in cold countries at night. It's awful. So like, what are you
You're gonna keep
what are you
warm
gonna do?
inside. Yeah. Okay, cool. So I want to move on to talking about some of the stuff you've written about intellectual dark web people, just the most fun people in the world. If they didn't exist, we'd have to invent them because they're just too fun.
Yeah, I really like to talk about some ideas. Like
Oh.
I've really been having some ideas. That could be an ASMR thing.
Oh my
Like,
goodness. We're gonna talk about some ideas. We're gonna talk about here and It seems like feeling this part of your skull. It seems like you have a special proclivity towards probably the first piece of yours I read was really excellent on the Rubin report that you wrote for Current Affairs.
yeah, that was my first piece I did, I think, ever.
Yeah, it was really excellent, and I think the one point that you make in it that I think is just stellar, and I think it's kind of what made me even pay any attention to these guys in the first place, is the idea that with all the things going on in the world, the actual range and like importance of the topics they discuss are really, really narrow and like really inconsequential, and that is one of the things that has really struck me. I mean, they're about the intellectual dark web. They're like want to like talk about all these important ideas, but at the end of the day, it's like kids on college campuses getting a little upset about something, and like there's like 3 instances of those a year or whatever it is. And so that to me is, I don't know, it's so amazing. And I guess this kind of ties into something you said on Twitter, I guess it was maybe last week, about a different topic, but how when you don't have people talking, a large range of discussion, it opens the door for cranks and all sorts of like crazy stuff, Yeah, and I don't know. I guess that's more of a comment than a question.
No, I think that it's really important that what that movement does is it takes something that is a good impulse, which is the desire to learn things and know about history and philosophy and politics and ideas. That's like a very good impulse to have, obviously. And I think you have it when you're young. Like I remember when I was like, I don't know if everyone's like this, but I had this moment when I was sort of 15 or so where I was just suddenly like, oh shit, I gotta know what all the things are. Like you would kind of like be like, I don't know, scrolling the internet and someone would mention like, Blade Runner. And it's like, oh shit, that's like that's a film you're supposed to see that I haven't seen. And then someone would make a reference to, I don't know, like a famous philosopher. And I'd be like, oh shit, I don't know what that guy says. Like I need to know what I need to know what the guy says.
It's like the things people had in their MySpace profile, the things that they liked, and you're like, I've never read that book. That must be important. I know this person. They're smart. I need to,
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's very you have this, or a lot of people have this desire to be doing intellectualism. Like, so to be able to go into a conversation and someone references like David Hume and you can be like, ah, yes, but then also he said blah, blah. And that's I think an impulse that these guys play on, because it's this combination of framing and branding yourself as a very deep thinker, or doing, I call it the theater of intellectualism, right? So acting like, oh yes, we are sitting in the chairs and yes, why don't we talk about this issue? But then if you actually break down what they're talking about, it's like, yeah, okay, so you're saying like, oh, we want to discuss the value of free speech. It's like, yeah, but you're not actually engaging with the topic in any way. You're just like pointing at a teenager with a nose ring and saying like, this person hates free speech. And it's like, okay, cool. Do you want to go any deeper into that? Do you want to like talk about like the thousands of years of philosophy we have on free speech and all the different debates we have and the different conceptions that different countries have, and the difference between like the historical background between the difference between, let's say, the American free speech approach and the European free speech approach? Because you get a lot of people who like I get very frustrated because a lot of Americans will just be like, oh, I'm so glad that we don't have like the hate speech laws that you have in Europe, because in Germany you can't talk about Nazism, or you can't, you have the hate speech, it's against free speech. It's like, well, you have to, like, saying you like free speech, it's like saying I like concepts, or I like nouns. Like, it doesn't actually mean anything unless you define what your boundaries are and why specifically you like those things. And you can make an argument against like European hate speech laws, but we didn't put them there because we're snowflakes who hate free speech. We put them there because our material historical circumstances were that we had free speech, and then people came along and used free speech to take power and then destroy free speech and also like murder millions of people. And we decided, hey, maybe like on balance, when you take into account all the circumstances, there are certain people or certain ideas that we don't actually develop any, that we don't get any values from, but that do cause a great amount of harm. And maybe it's okay that that's a limitation that we have. And you don't, it's a lot of appeal to saying like, we are the classical liberals, and we love the values and the speech and the values and the rights and yes, John Locke. But it's like, you're not actually engaging, you're not grappling with any of these ideas, really.
So the other piece that you wrote for the outline, which I really liked, and I feel like I might have even mentioned something like this to Light of Gold when I talked to her last year. But the people who use logic, like they chant it like an incantation. Like I banish you with logic, and it's always it's always the people who are the most irrational, I feel like, who try and like hide behind this thing of logic, and this phenomenon of like, I don't know, personally I think it has a lot to do with material conditions of like downwardly mobile, mostly males who are very online, who need some sort of like validation for their own worth, because they're the intelligence, and I've put myself in this category to some extent. I'm like, this describes me a lot, and this is something that like necessarily want to like say is trivial, but like some of these guys could handle it a lot better. But you have this desire to like show like, no, I'm smart, I understand this, you're wrong. And because for a lot of people who grew up their whole life and told, you go to school, you do well, you do this, you do that, you'll be fine, you'll have a comfortable life, you're white, you're middle class, it's all going to be good for you. And then it's like, these people are so illogical, can't they just understand that if they listen to me? It's an interesting phenomenon that I think is a proxy for other things.
Yeah, well, it's funny because even though like I'm not a man, I kind of had I have a similar component to my personality, in that I was always like when I was a kid, I was like I did well in school, and so people would say like, "Oh, you're a smart kid," and whatever. And I personally like, I liked to put my hand up in class and show off a little bit. And when I was a little bit older, like I liked to do debate, and I liked arguing things with people, and I had like almost like what would usually be considered like a more masculine approach to that kind of thing. Like I liked showing off my proverbial intellectual dick, basically.
Yeah.
Which for whatever reasons, the socialization didn't quite catch with me, and I still like to kind of act like a dick to people. But yeah, I completely agree that because of course that doesn't necessarily amount to good real life outcomes. Because there are things in life that are more important than reading a book, and B, because I mean the socioeconomic circumstances that we're in mean that fewer and fewer people can get good stable jobs, or can become like big academics, unless you're in the right economic circumstances, and living standards are dropping, and more people have to move back home after college. And yeah, people kind of search for that validation. And have you ever read Corey Robin's book, The Reactionary Mind?
It's like on the top of my must read list, because I've heard just so many people reference it lately. And like I said, like I've had my like brush-ins with reactionary type of thinking, and this is something I'm definitely gonna have to address, because as I get older, there's a lot of ways you can, you can just become more reactionary. These kids these days, and then you have kids and the evolutionary psychology thing. Some of those arguments, I think they're more appealing to parents, because you have kids and you look at your kids and you think like, well, I think I've raised them the same. I think they have the same, like nurture cultural inputs,
Yeah.
and but yet they've turned out obviously different, and I have a hard time believing that there's that many cultural things. And so those evolutionary psych things, you're like, well, maybe there's something to this.
Yeah, and I think also like because I worked with kids a little bit when I was an adult, and I didn't have siblings, or I wasn't around kids a lot up until then. But one thing you notice when you're around kids more is that you see their personality so early. And I don't believe it's a complete like blank slate. The kids are blank slates, but the general position is like, okay, well, culture has an influence, and how you're socialized has an influence. But you do really see something like when you are talking to like a 2-year-old kid who can barely talk yet, and yet they're still, you just see like in their facial expressions or the way they approach things, you're like, well, this kid and that kid already at the same age, same sort of background, are like so different. And I get it, it can be appealing, like maybe that's just something like innate in them. Like I have friends who have kids, and they say like, when my baby was like 4 months old, I could see like their personality, or I could, my first kid, I saw like when they were a baby, they were like this, and then my other baby like was like that. And who knows? That's a really complex question, but I do think you can definitely be exposed to those things. But like to get back to the
the reactionary mind.
Sorry, I went off.
I went off, so that was me.
So like the thesis of that book basically is that so the traditional view of conservatism is that it's about preserving the status quo, or even maybe going back a little bit to the status quo. And his view is like, well, if you actually look at conservatism, it's actually not about preserving what's already there. It tends to actually kind of be quite radical and revitalizing, and it changes itself in every generation. It adapts to the tone and the aesthetics and the language of the day. But what it's always trying to do is to preserve the power structures that are in place. So the people who have power, they want them to keep power, and the people who are oppressed, they want them to stay oppressed. But they will change all the stuff around that to adapt to the moment and to appeal to people, but it's all about preserving those structures. I think that's very interesting, not least because if you've ever like studied fascism or read a lot about fascism, his description of conservatism is actually very similar to the description of fascism, which is quite interesting, because with him, then according to his theory, like there's a lot less daylight between those two things than is traditionally viewed. But also with the IDW kids, what's interesting is that I think a lot of them, because they're young, they think the talking points are new, and they don't understand that these are literally the same talking points that come up in every generation. Like the thing with the liberal the crazy college kids. I don't know that it was popular in the US, but there was this popular sitcom in the UK in the 80s called The Young Ones, which was about college students, and there was literally like, obviously they wouldn't have used the term, but there was like an SJW character called Rick in the 80s. And you can even go back, like even fucking like the character of like Pierre in War and Peace is like, has some elements of that. Or even like fucking Hamlet. Like Hamlet is like he comes back and he's like at the beginning of the play, he's a student and he's just come back home. He's being like really obnoxious and he thinks he knows everything. And obviously it's not like the same substantive issues, but it's like that's been the stereotype of students for as long as students have existed. So it's not a new thing, and a lot of the talking points, they just come up again. And you see, for example, if you look at Rubin's theory, it's like, okay, so conservatives, they know they've kind of lost like the gay battle. Like that's like, obviously some people are still very strict and religious, and they still don't accept gay marriage or gay equality, but in general the conservative mainstream's like, all right, we lost that one. Everyone's kind of gone on with it, but then they just recycle the same arguments and they use them about trans people, right? So, and it's literally all the same tropes you see again and again and again, but it's just recycled and rebranded to different people. And you can see how the same arguments also get dressed up in different language for different audiences. So for the young potential, the young online male, it'll be dressed up in like memes or like edgy. So different things appeal to different people. So you have like the more like alt-right, like 4chan type guys who like, they just really like edgy memes, and then that works for them. And there's others who are like, oh no, I'm not a 4chan type, but I'm an, I like to have serious, I consider myself a classical liberal. And so you dress up the same ideas in a wig and a robe and put it in a velvet chair, and you say, yes, we are discussing ideas on this show, this is the show about ideas, and that appeals to another type of person. And then you can have like, even then you have the mainstream newspapers that middle-aged men are buying, and you can literally put the same ideas about Muslims and immigrants and trans people, but you just put it in language that they like. You say like, well, we have, serious concerns, and, we have to consider the ramifications of the policy, and, we must be sensible, and it's all the same shit, but you just dress it up in different clothing, and it appeals to different people, and that's how conservative talking points work.
Yeah, that's right on.
Yeah, but I mean, that's something that I think the left could certainly learn from. Like, if you have if you have any friends who are like get really obsessive about like Marxist theory, and it's you have two people debating each other about the exact meaning of like the labor theory of value, and it's like, dude, it's like, yeah, this is gonna win people over. Everyone loves talking about the labor.
My argument about that actually is, whenever I hear people arguing about the atrocities that Marx has brought onto the world, I'm always surprised that they never talk about all those discussions of the labor theory of value that people have had to sit through. That, to me, is by far the greatest evil he has foisted upon humanity. I mean, if I have to, as soon as I hear that, I check out, especially since no one agrees on it. Half of them don't even think they should keep it. It's just like, it's one of the reasons I actually haven't sat down and read Capital yet.
I started reading it, and I will read it sometime. I promise. But it's like the difficult second album, because I think I read like the Communist Manifesto when I was like 19. Yeah, and I was like, yeah, this is really good, and it's short. You can read it in like half an hour, and it's like engaging, and it's like it gets through a lot of ideas. But you're like, yeah, this all makes sense. And you start reading Capital, and it's like, so the linen price is in 1842, and I was like,
So I guess the one thing I just wanted to ask you, because I think we're getting to the end of our time, when you don't have a real discussion of something, how it opens up space for cranks. And you had talked about this in regards to how like we're all, you didn't use these words, but how we're all somewhat complicit in the system, that like, we all benefit from it. And it's hard to like realize that to some extent, like if you live in a first world democracy, quote unquote, you're kind of the 1%, and like you very much like you're taking it, you're taking advantage of that exploitation, and that makes it very difficult to fully articulate what's wrong with it. There's a lot of like, you don't want to admit it, and then since there's not enough information, it becomes very accessible to conspiracy theory. And I've noticed something very similar in terms of talking about energy. Like if you ask the nuclear people, no, we need nuclear. You say some people, oh no, we can run everything on solar. And then some people are like, no, we're just completely fucked. There's nothing we can do about it. And it's like, and there's no, it might be one of the topics I think there's not the least consensus, but it's I don't think that the conversations are so difficult to have around it. I'm just curious if you have any thoughts about that, because I really did like those tweets you sent out a few weeks ago. They really encapsulated a lot of the things I've been thinking about.
Most people don't have power on an individual basis to change a system, right? And even if you look at, for example, even like the EU, they're very into, the Paris Agreement and trying to, switch to renewable energy and, reduce fossil fuel emissions. And they're doing well in that. in comparison to, let's say Indonesia or Bangladesh or Vietnam. And that all sounds well and good until you switch from the sort of supply view to the demand view. And you realize, okay, well, the reason we are, so relatively green in the EU is because most of our stuff that we use doesn't get made in the EU. It's made in Indonesia and Bangladesh and Vietnam, where the factories pump out smoke and occasionally crush people. And it's really hard to reckon with that. And it's almost like death in like, when you think about death, this is getting really grim. But when you think about death, and your mind almost kind of like shuts that, like you can't conceive of like not existing.
Yeah.
And you kind of, I think when you have like such a huge issue and like, well, how do you change literally everything about the way the world functions? And you don't know how to handle that. And there isn't good information. And when you're talking about, especially when you talk about more technical things like energy, like unless you have specialized knowledge in that area, you can't really like, it's quite hard to figure everything out. So it's easy to fall into whatever is available to you. And especially with the internet being around, that might mean conspiracy theories, or it might mean weird racist theories, or it could be flat earth, or it could be, we've lost Western civilization because look at my Greek statue. We love ideas. My favorite thing is like a lot of those IDW guys will have like Greek statues as their like Twitter avatars and stuff, which sometimes they'll have like their Greek statues as their avatar while they're talking about how like people are having too much gay sex. And it's like you might want to read about ancient Greece. And also like guess what, Greeks did not think of themselves as Europeans. All the people they talked to were like Syrians and Egyptians and stuff. But also those like those white marble statues in ancient Greece, those statues were painted and they look tacky as shit. So it's not even like, you're not even looking at a thing. You're looking at a thing and you don't even know what it is, but you're very sure it's the key to Western civilization. So whatever it is, people will put their faith in it because it's very hard to have the knowledge and have the willpower to change things, to understand the problems on a systemic level and to change them. So that's why you got to organize. Because otherwise, if people are stuck on an individual basis and they're trying to figure things out by just like looking at the computer and trying to figure out what all the problems are in the world, then maybe you become a flat earther, essentially.
I was about to halfway through that, I was like, oh, I need to try and end on something positive. So, but I think that was positive enough. So that's good. Thank you very much for talking with me. This is a lot of fun.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it.